Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 45. We're going to be talking about the movie Mandy from this very year. Next episode, be prepared, we're going to be discussing True Detective Season 1 with my friend Eric Davis, who you might know from books like Technosis. He did the 33 and a third book about the fourth Led Zeppelin record. He's been a music journalist forever. He does the podcast Expanding Mind. He's pretty amazing, and I'm excited to talk about that with him.
Yeah, I've thought about that show more than any other show I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And read more about it and read more of the philosophy behind it. And so I almost have too much for that episode.
Yeah. We should consider making it like a 2 to 3 part episode.
Yeah.
And maybe you should weigh in. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. Let us know what you think of how episodes are going. If you have any questions about True Detective Season 1 that you'd like us to address, any complaints, keep it friendly, let us know.
Or don't keep it friendly. I don't mind.
Okay, that's true. It's not like it's social media.
Keep it smart at least. Like, don't blather at us with some fucking nonsense you picked up in a college classroom.
Yeah, speaking of complaints, I want to apologize to our listeners who couldn't find Near Dark, which we covered in our last episode. That is an amazing movie that is shockingly unavailable in streaming, which I don't understand.
Yeah, it's weird. You'd think with like Catherine Bigelow's success and like how good all of her other movies are and how many people that are kind of important still are in that movie.
I think patriarchy just finds a way anyway to keep good women down.
Yeah, hopefully.
Do you have anything to plug?
No.
Me neither. Moving on.
Yeah.
Sign up for our newsletter. Go to scarythoughts.org. Top right corner, give us your email address. We'll use it very nicely. Send you information about current episodes, future episodes, and little recommendations if you value our opinion on anything. And last little note, spoilers ahead. We are not reviewing this movie. We've seen it and you've seen it. And if you haven't, go see it, come back, enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, that's one of the strange things about this movie is almost no one I've talked to has seen it or even heard of it or was aware of it. And if they were aware of it, they kind of dismissed it as yet another Nicolas Cage nonsense movie.
Which is fair because you could look at that poster and think, oh, Ghost Rider 2, basically.
Yeah.
And would not be too incorrect in a certain way, I suppose. But I'm totally into this movie. Before we talk about Mandy, I want to ask you about your health because we had some amazing Armageddon here in the Bay Area. The town of Paradise is gone, and we've all been inhaling it for almost a week, and Chad was pretty out of commission for a while.
Yeah, well, I have like the kind of asthma that'll kill you in your sleep, and thanks to medical science, they invented Advair, and so basically I've been fine, but it really has shaken my belief in my ability to survive an apocalyptic scenario. I think if the skies are all ashy, I'm going to be pretty fucked, which means I'm probably not going to be trying to do any sort of rebuilding. I'm definitely doubling down on my being a raider thing. Like I will be helping to destroy the world at the end of it. I'll for sure be riding around outside Bartertown, not participating in its economy in any meaningful way.
Great. Okay. Where do you want to start with this movie? So this was my choice. This one was like, we gotta do Mandy, and I'll talk about why later. But what'd you think?
Well, I think the few people who I saw were like really advocating for it are sort of the more heavy metal completist fanboy horror scene, which I guess I'm probably pretty well aligned to in a lot of ways, but sometimes I'm like, I just don't need to see every single Splatterfest movie. I don't need to see Hatchet 1, 2, 3, and 4. Like it seemed like that scene was like online who was really going crazy for it. So I just kind of ignored it. And I also thought Ghost Rider was terrible. And even though I think Nicolas Cage is amazing, and the director of Mandy, he had this really funny thing where he said he was like the California Klaus Kinski. And I was like, oh. I was like, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So I like him as an actor. He's in some of my absolute favorite movies, but I just was going to give this one a pass. I just missed it.
That's funny. I was going to save this for later, but speaking about like Nicolas Cage specifically, I had this revelation about him because, you know, there's so often that question, do you think Nicolas Cage is a good actor? And it seems like the world is 50-50 on the answer to that question, because he's so his own thing. And he hasn't devolved into sort of a De Niro, Pacino parody of himself. Well, he is.
Yeah.
But just sort of being lazy about it. He still seems to be giving like 110% to almost every role that you see him in. But I think what I realized is, well, for me, I loved him in Valley Girl, loved him in Raising Arizona, and then I think he has been fucking terrible in everything until Mandy. I just don't like him in anything. I mean, I've seen Face Off like 5 or 6 times, but I watched that like I watched Troll 2. And I think it's this. It made me think of Nicolas Cage as sort of like a Joe Satriani or something. So just imagine this young teenager who's just fucking incredible at their instrument, super talented, and made an album, was in a band, and just the overplaying made perfect sense in that first band. And then quit that band and continue to overplay on every record and ruin every record he touches because he's amazing, but no band needs that kind of oversaturation of notes until he finally hooks up with some new kids and it just makes sense again. Like, he's incredibly talented and totally misused for almost every role. He never makes sense, but the hysteria, the surreal over taxation he does to an audience made so much sense in this movie because everything about the music in this movie, the cinematography, the special effects, everything was so exaggerated that Nicolas Cage doing his thing made sense. It works. It's in that world. Whereas him doing his thing in any other movie doesn't make sense.
I mean, you're onto something there where like he's like overplaying. Another way of looking at it is the rest of the band isn't good enough for him. And I think that happens a lot too. I mean, there's definitely a few peaks in there.
And when you see that, you don't want to listen to that band. It's bad for everybody.
But I mean, I think you're forgetting a few other excellent movies. Wild at Heart. Also,
I'm sorry. Yes, he's great in Wild at Heart.
Vampire's Kiss.
Terrible. We're totally going to cover that movie.
What? That movie rules.
I'm very conflicted on that.
Yeah, and Leaving Las Vegas, also excellent.
Yeah, that one's tough, and that's almost like not Nicolas. He almost doesn't do his thing. You know,
you do get a little hint of that role though in Mandy, in the vodka drinking scene.
That scene is brilliant.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie is like chainsaws and Nicolas Cage gets his hidden vodka out in the bathroom. Like, those are two of the peak moments in this movie.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little more about the cast. So one thing, do you know about Linus Roche, the guy who plays Jeremiah Sand?
Bit. You know, I looked up some of his, after I watched an interview or two with him, he talked about how he had some experience in not a cult, but he had some experience with spiritual leaders. I was like, okay, he's definitely involved with some charlatans.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was in Enlighten Next, which was basically this cult that got kind of taken down, and strangely, the leader eventually apologized to all of his followers. But Linus Roche, the guy who plays Jeremiah Sand, is not too far from the role he played. He was really high up in this cult that has since dissolved. And I did as much digging as I could, and I couldn't find what he feels about the dissolution of that cult. But I think it was a really fascinating choice to get someone who was, I mean, it would be like, not like getting Miss Cavage to play a cult leader, but maybe Miss Cavage's lieutenant to play a cult leader.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like that type of cult leader in our society now too. Because I just listened to My Favorite Murder, that podcast. I'm kind of finally getting into that, and they talk about Squeaky Fromme. There's like a really long episode about her, and nowadays it just seems so fucking implausible that you could have a Manson type character just have that much control over people. But then you also see like these really hugely popular social media people that kind of command more of like a macro power. Like, they are also in their own weird ways like cult leaders, especially the charlatans in the Silicon Valley, like all these like meditation gurus and people that have all this like power, like these like transhumanist cult people, like Ray Kurzweil, like people who like are TED Talk people.
Yeah.
They sort of function. They have like the David Koresh role in our society now, but you don't really get the same type of like sexually charismatic Jesus cult leader like Jeremiah Sands is.
I don't know.
But you know where you do see it though?
Yoga.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like you only see it there. Like in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine. She was going to some power healing retreat or some shit like that. Like one of my wife's friends, and there are creeper dudes around. And she was asking me. She's like, "Well, let me ask you about this guy." I was like, "From your spiritual thing?" And she's like, "Yes." I said, "He's a creep. Get the fuck away from him." And she's like, "I knew it." And like that was all that we. That's all the information we exchanged about him. It's like, look, the self-identified male feminist energy worker is a fucking predator. Always, 100% of the time. You know? So I guess they're out there in your yoga class.
Oh, for sure. Did you have a particular take on this movie that you think sort of framed your primary experience of it?
Yeah, so the first time I watched it, there were so many things that I liked on the screen. And it just felt like in the way that Guillermo del Toro or one of those guys who's like, man, I grew up with all this shit and I processed it through my body and I threw it back on the screen in a way that I wanted to see. So I was very on edge. I kept waiting to be like, look at this piece of shit nostalgia movie. But it never crossed that line. Like all the things that it's referencing are in their own way incredibly obscure, even for a genre fan. And they're not straight ripoffs. Like, so there might be a weird... Like the chainsaw fight is kind of an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2's chainsaw fight, but it's not the same as having the Millennium Falcon literally lift off the ground in Stranger Things.
Right.
You know, it's doing something different. It's almost like what you find in Harold Bloom's Anxiety of Influence when he talks about like you're influenced by the thing, and then you have this anxiety about being influenced by the thing because you want to create something new. You're ultimately not getting away from the thing, but you're pushing from it is going to try to create a new thing. It's almost like a slight evolution instead of like a retromania type of thing.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for tone because even though, chainsaw fight, we know where that came from, or many of us know where that came from. Pinhead, there's totally a pinhead in this movie. There are a lot of sort of intertextual reference points throughout this movie, but for some reason, I think because this movie is so slow and so somber and doesn't have like a 80s retro splash, it never feels like, Pinhead, get it? Did you catch that? It never quite feels like that. It just feels like this sort of soft running homage going underneath the movie itself. The movie doesn't feel dependent on those things. It feels like these just touchstones and tips of the hat to its predecessors.
Yeah, and it really made me think about like why, like I have this this relationship with like all this nostalgia stuff. You know, Stranger Things is a perfect example. I love Stranger Things. Of course I did. You know, it was made for me basically. But then I was thinking about that, like, okay, that was like more of a product made for me, whereas this movie is something made by someone like me. Yes. And it's hard to kind of differentiate those two things.
Yeah.
But I hope this dude makes like 6 more movies, you know, and eventually before he quits, they hand him some sort of cool franchise that he could do something cool with and see what happens. Yeah. And then it ruins his career and he sucks. But hopefully he gets there.
Did you see Beyond the Black Rainbow?
I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
It's super. It's he feels that they're sort of a pair. They're both connected. And I mean, they take place in the same year. They're both, was it 1984?
Yeah, they were written at the same time and kind of, as he says in interviews, they were written to basically help him get over his parents' death. I didn't really read why they died, but like I guess that it was pretty close together.
Yeah.
And his father directed one of the best Westerns ever. He directed Tombstone. Really? 1993 Tombstone with that like knockout performance by Val Kilmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to revisit that one.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me the most about this is, okay, I'm going to go into a thing I've been over, well-worn territory for repeat listeners. And this might be the last time because who knows what movies are going to come into our world in the future. This could be the end of it. But my whole thing about aesthetic horror. And, you've talked about this idea of this era of auteur horror, and I've been talking about aesthetic horror. And I think this really does fit in with aesthetic horror, and aesthetic using that word the way like vaporwave does.
Yeah. And the proles are calling it elevated horror.
Which they can go fuck themselves.
Yeah.
That's just nonsense. And that just, I mean,
fucking peasants.
it doesn't work. That kind of pretense just makes it work. Like it actually lays it low.
Yeah. And then I think some more well-known genre fans who have also taken issue with that term. It's sort of assuming that the rest of horror is not elevated.
Right.
Which I think it's one of the things that just bothers me. Like it's one of the sole eras of class warfare I engage in these days is non-genre people coming into genre and like pretending they're going to make it better. It just fucking infuriates me.
Totally. I think your biggest example of that is that book, The Passage,
which works, but it just bothers me too.
Yeah, maybe you should explain why, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, like so The Passage.
What's the guy's name?
I don't know. Who cares?
It's right there. Okay, let's.
So this dude is like one of these loser MFA writer guys, and I don't want to say loser, but like they've gone through the Midwestern MFA program where they go sit in the fucking forest with their precious friends and like workshop their shit to death. And the dude is not a genre fan. And then every single one of those programs I've looked at, because there are times when I was like, maybe I should get a writing MFA. I'm a writer, maybe that'll help. And then I realized, no, $100,000 worth of debt and hanging around intolerable people that I have to pay to hang out around with. I have my own intolerable friends. Like, why would I spend money to meet new ones? But every single one of them has like an explicit, like, look, genre is not for here. Like, we don't care about your cowboy and western novel or your horror novel or your sci-fi novel. This is not the place. And to me, that there's always been an antagonism with that. Like that sort of person who writes at an elevated level has a dismissal of genre fiction. And then along comes this MFA dude who says even in interviews, he's like, I'm not really that big of a genre fan. And he writes this vampire novel, which is pretty interesting. It's not bad. It's people love it. I think the second book really falls off personally, but
I think everybody feels that way.
But he was successful doing it. And another example, probably even better, is Welcome to Night Vale, which I love and I find is just unassailable. And those guys are not genre fans either, but it's weird that like they are not like sitting around in their parents' basement VHS fan guys. And I feel like Panos Cosmatos was. And so it makes me happier to see him or a Guillermo del Toro or like a Rob Zombie who are like, they lived it and breathed it, and it actually probably saved them at some point in their life. And for them to make something I'm happier about. But that's just like, it's the same thing as like hating yuppies for no good reason. I get it. It's not logical, but that's where I'm at.
Well, I think that referring to those other filmmakers, what I appreciate about this film's reference points is that it feels like it's sort of like a Tarkovsky movie, but that has these reference points instead of, I don't know, Cold War Russia or something, or Soviet Union. He takes these tropes and he makes this film that is incredibly minimalist. So little happens. And if you look at it, it's pretty much all tropes. I mean, there's nothing particularly unique about it except for its style. Because again, like, chainsaw fight, revenge film, crazed cult killers modeled after the Manson family. Like, these are not unique ideas, but they're done with such a very unique style and viewpoint. And I think that why this sort of fits my like aesthetic horror idea and falls in line with movies like Amer and The Neon Demon is because it's another example of you could criticize it for being style over substance, but then I think you can sort of back up and go, well, okay, we can think about the history of cultural criticism as beginning with the book Subcultures, the Meaning of Style by Dick Hebditch. And for him, style is substance. That's the argument of that book. And that's why we have and that's the genesis of cultural criticism, is this argument for that with the collar of Teddy Boy is actually a meaningful gesture. It's a cultural signifier that actually has meaning and weight in the world. And I think that these films are doing that. They're sort of like these gestures that you could go, well, there's no there. It's just, it looks cool. And that is an easy criticism of this film. It's like, everything that happens, that you hear, that you see, every line of dialogue is just, you could easily go, 'cause it's cool. Like that seems to be why.
Yeah, and the director talks about how he thinks about movies visually and sonically. So he's almost like constructing ideas of things he wants to see and then framing them on a purposely minimal storyline.
Yeah.
You know, he talked about when, like, basically it's just a revenge film. You know, like somebody gets wronged, they go back and kill him. It's like every Western ever, every 70s grindhouse movie ever.
Yeah, it's straight up John Wick.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that different from John Wick or Taken or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just an invocation to violence followed by violence.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that make this movie stand out over like a normal revenge film. And I think the character of Mandy is one of the things that really does that, because she's murdered, and she's the agent that causes the hero dude to go fucking not save the day, but get revenge. But I think what's kind of cooler about her is she's so well developed as a character leading up to her death. And she goes out in her own way. You know, she's not like cowed by the dude who kills her. She dies laughing at him. I mean, she dies screaming eventually. But I think that her character is so strong that it's like the dog in John Wick. Like, the dog gets killed and you're like, holy fuck, they killed a dog. And it makes the revenge way better.
I think there's also another way to frame this film. And the writer-director sort of intimates that this is a way to think about this film, but her death causes everyone else to have to live in her fantastic reality. Mm-hmm. So she's this artist, this visual artist, and she reads these fantasy sci-fi novels. And what happens is she is murdered, and then everybody has to reckon in her world, like a hell that is modeled after her fantasies. And I think that's a really interesting way that her murder sort of like explodes this new world that they all have to fight it out in.
Yeah, I want to cycle back to the style thing a little bit too.
Yeah.
You know, now that we're going deep for True Detective, I finally cracked open the Schopenhauer.
Woo.
And he has an essay called On Style, and he basically talks about that one of the highest levels of style, and he's speaking particularly about writers, but this could be really any form of art, is that the best stylists are the people who take the simplest ideas and make them incredible. Or you experience something really insane and you lay it out very clearly. So for him, like a book like Endurance, which is just about the Antarctic expedition that like crashed and everybody had to eat seal meat for like 2 years before they survived. Like, that is a story, because of its insanity, it can be told very plainly. But it's kind of interesting where, like, a revenge film like this, the story is insane too, but because we're so used to these genres, it's very plain. It's funny to think about, like, a plane murder or a plane event,
right,
like that. You know, like that's
you mean
where
like the murder itself isn't enough.
Yeah, like, okay, like if any of your friends were like, oh, what'd you do this weekend? Well, my girlfriend was murdered, and then I had to go on a rampage and kill 8 weird people. It'd be like, holy shit, that's the craziest thing ever. But it barely gets your pulse up in a movie, you know, right. Or it might barely get your pulse up in a movie.
Right. It's interesting that this film, as a revenge film, it has the same trajectory actually as a rape revenge film. Because, you know, all rape revenge films, as far as I can think of them, everyone I've ever seen, they have the exact same trajectory, is that woman gets raped and beaten, and she goes on a rampage of revenge. And then the question of where that goes is, does she become the evil that she is trying to snuff out? Does she cross the line in terms of her sanity, in terms of her bloodlust? And the interesting thing about this movie is it has the exact same trajectory, but there's no self-realization. There's no, oh my God, what have I done in this movie?
There's almost more of a becoming. There's like the theme of the tiger through the whole movie. Yeah. So in her artwork in the beginning, she's like, there's this drawing, it's sort of like some mystical creature taming a tiger. So that's kind of where they're at. And then, you know, when everything's going bad, Nicolas Cage is wearing that shirt with the tiger on it. And then there's the tiger walking around in the lab. And after that point is when the killing like really goes off. He kind of fights the bikers as almost like an underboss kind of way. Like they're sort of responsible, but they're more of a thing that he gets to the main people. And then the tiger comes, and then the revenge happens. Like once he's dealing with the people who are in the cult, he becomes basically unstoppable. Like there's moments where you're like, holy shit, is he going to get through these bikers? But there's no doubt that he's going to murder every single one of the cult members.
Yeah.
You know?
But he doesn't kill the chemist. I also like that he has, like every fucking revenge movie, including John Wick and Kind of Taken, he is a man with a certain set of skills. But he's kind of retired. No, but you get that maybe he's a Vietnam vet. I mean, he has all these skills, and he's got weapons that he knows how to make weapons, and he's hidden his weapons because he's clearly, he had a crossbow but had to have someone else keep it from him. That sort of infers that he has this nature that he's trying to create distance from, right? He lives out in the middle of nowhere, but didn't seem to have ready access to an arsenal of weapons. Yeah.
I mean, he'd be of the age to be a Vietnam vet. Like all the early 80s movies, like Predator, all those characters were vets. Lethal Weapon, like they all had that history. So like, I think that's a good explanation of where his particular murderous skill set comes from.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of the moment of where it all kicks off, that really confused me about this movie is that the cult leader invokes the Black Skulls to go and basically get Mandy for them, but they don't really do anything. The cult and the Black Skulls go to Red and Mandy's house, and all the Black Skulls do is take Mandy, put her in the living room, take Red, and tie him up outside. But the cult members are right there, and we know they have at least one gun. They could have done that themselves.
Yeah.
So, and then the burning wasn't the Black Skulls. The Black Skulls just sort of like showed up in the bedroom quietly at night. And then the next thing you know, Mandy and Red are being taunted. So why did the Black Skulls have to be invoked?
Yeah.
They didn't do it. They literally moved their two bodies like 20 feet that way and 30 feet that way.
I mean, this is where I think the whole thing gets a little Clive Barker-y in a really good way. Because I just read The Hellbound Heart again, which I started thinking that like Clive Barker, of all the newer like post-80s horror, I mean newer as in like not traditional or gothic horror or anything like that, was the most original voice. Like his stuff is like not referential at all. Like, I mean, you look at Hellraiser, like, man, where the fuck did that come from? There's no obvious precedent for that. I mean, if you dig, I'm sure like there's always references and things like that. It's a haunted house story, whatever. But the whole look of the Cenobites, I mean, obviously it's S&M culture, but like in horror, it's not there before. But it implies this whole deep world. And I think like I wouldn't be surprised if there's like an easy comic book series to be written about where they come from. And there's also some conversation like, oh, are they actually in the world? Because the guy that has the crossbow is telling them like, oh, they're running drugs around and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, well, maybe they had some sort of relationship with the cult in the way that Charles Manson's cult had interactions with Hell's Angels because of drug deals and things like that. Like, you wonder if there was something like that. But I do agree, like, they didn't need to be there to like capture her. Or maybe they did, because like Red would have just run the fuck through them probably without those creatures there.
Although it seems to me that it's not as if the cult were entirely made up of very timid, weak people. It seems like they could just sneak into the house, shoot Red in his sleep, point a gun at Mandy, and that's that.
Yeah, I mean, or, maybe they just enjoy wielding the flute of Abraxas or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's possible. So did you think the action sequences in and of themselves were good or interesting? This kind of came up for me watching it like a third time, where I realized that if you took all the red filters out and the Johan Johansson, rest in peace, soundtrack away, are the action sequences actually that good, or are they just kind of, again, trope-laden, but they look cool because of the aesthetics?
Yeah, I think like the aesthetics have a lot to do with how the scenes. I mean, we're in a world with John Wick now. You know what I mean? Like, so that's the bar. Nicolas Cage, I guess, was in a wheelchair not too long before filming this movie. So he's not super mobile.
Fair enough.
And also I think the filming for the schedule was really compressed. So I think they had like one night to shoot some of these things. So I think it could have probably definitely been a little more interesting, but it works.
Yeah, totally. I think it's also bizarre that taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has definitely acclimated my relationship to violence in a very different way than it was previously. But it does seem to me that we are in this time when more average people are more familiar with the ins and outs and details of real violence and how it can be practiced against the body, especially hand-to-hand. And there's zero hand-to-hand in this movie. I'm just bringing this up as a thought, that movie violence is getting more and more bananas. Like wire fu is even past, it's passe. Now, again, John Wick is just this paradigm of how completely bananas on-screen violence can be. But we actually know more and more about how real physical violence works and how it actually looks. And it looks... So we know more and more that it's not like movie violence, and movie violence is getting more and more weird. They're not meeting in the middle. No one is making an action movie where the violence is exploring the realistic details of combat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I definitely see what you're saying. I mean, we're also in a world with World Star Hip Hop and bestcore.com. You can go see as much real violence as you want.
That's a good point.
And I think you're right. Like after you've watched like 5 ISIS beheading videos, most horror effects are going to be they're not going to be that crazy. And I think what Mandy does is the direction, which is it's so stylized and interesting to look at. Like it's not trying to reproduce real violence. But then, back to John Wick, what's cool about that movie is all the training that Keanu Reeves did to make those things look credible. So I think that's about as close to a blend as you're going to get right now. It's so stylized. It's so hyper weird. But the movements are movements that could theoretically work. That's definitely not what's going on in Mandy. But I think we might see more of that, hopefully. I don't know.
Yeah. I would just be fascinated to see a movie that... I think you brought this up in the Green Room episode when we were talking to Eugene Robinson about how you kind of never see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu moves in movies ever. And granted, Jiu-Jitsu's pretty boring. It's a lot more boring than watching people do like cock their fist back for a full second before they do a roundhouse, which nobody would ever get hit by if they were sober. But it looks hella cool. And, 2 people wrestling can be super slow and boring. But there's got to be a way that filmmaking can explore the minutia of those details in a way that is... I mean, cinema does all sorts of ways of depicting realism. I mean, mumblecore is an entire genre about how completely banal human life can be.
Yeah.
But genuine physical violence seems to not have gone mumblecore. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that one of the things I really appreciate about Mandy is that it is visual and interesting, and so much cinema, it's like, man, this could just be TV. Like there's literally no reason why this is a movie. The camera isn't doing anything interesting. You're not using the medium it's sound and light, like that. Go as far as you can with it. Like show us something that no one has ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate so much that this movie is, the expression yes and, which is sort of an improv comedy that you never say no in an improv comedy sketch. You always yes and whatever's coming at you to amp it up. And this movie is so yes-anded. There's a TV commercial with the cheddar goblin. Yep. Then it becomes animation. Yep. And then there's a chainsaw fight with a bigger chainsaw. Yep. Everything just seems to be at absolute 11.
Yeah.
And it works.
And I think that has like a charm that echoes back to Don Coscarelli's movies like Phantasm. There's this, I think, is that his name, Coscarelli?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll just go with that for right now. I bought his book the other day.
Oh, cool.
It looks really fun. But there is kind of that like glorying and making weird shit, like all the trauma films, like all the Toxic Avenger films. It's so manic and weird and fun. And there was also definitely something of the 80s. There was like that. I just rewatched UHF, Weird Al's movie that came out in 1989.
Yeah.
Kind of famous for being one of Kramer from Seinfeld's first roles, Stanley Spadowski. And that movie is just madcap yes and after madcap yes and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder, and it's referencing all this pop culture stuff explicitly because that's Weird Al's game. And there definitely seemed like the 80s was the first decade where people were really aware of genre as a thing to be parodied and also enjoyed simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was also the decade that like huge genre pieces were like whole genres were just shit on. Like I think Blazing Saddles comes out in the early 80s, kills westerns dead.
Does
or
it?
is it late 70s maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah. Either way, like it comes out and that's kind of it. Like like Spinal Tap made it really hard to be a hair band after that. Like it has all this stuff. But now it seems to be like reverence for these deep genres it's almost the opposite of that. It's like not can we clown them really hard because we're so inside, but can we make a perfect thing really hard because we're so inside?
Right. I can see that. Something else about being inside. So many horror movies have to grapple with whether or not the characters identify what's happening on screen as something that we all know about. Like, does the vampire film call the vampires vampires? The Walking Dead calls zombies walkers, that sort of thing. There's always are they going to do it or are they not? Are they going to build the rules from scratch? And that doesn't really apply here, but I feel like this movie does the opposite, where when Nicolas Cage is meeting with his friend in the trailer to get the weapons and breaks down and starts explaining what happened to Mandy, he starts yelling about, they were gnarly psychos, crazy evil. Like it was just so banal. Just they certainly went like, you ever see Hellraiser? It was like some Cenobites on motorcycles. It was just like first thing that came into his head, which was totally inarticulate, which I thought was really great.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have a language of cinema to describe that shit, especially then, and especially if you're those guys.
Yep.
It's like it is one of those like when you watch a zombie movie, and you're like, it's zombies, and you're like, okay, right, but you only know that because there's fictional zombies in your world. But then, okay, does that mean there's no zombie movies in your world? Like that, it alters the world too much.
Yeah.
Like that, no one ever came up with that ever. So what else did they not come up with?
Right.
And then setting it in 1983, I feel like nowadays that's just a license to print money, like set your shit in the 80s.
Yeah.
But here, I'm curious, like why that choice is made. Like, is it simply this is sort of the genre?
Well, one thing it does is that, so everything in this movie is stylized. There's nothing in this movie that's realistic that I can think of. I guess we could interpret realistic in a certain way to say that certain aspects are realistic, but nothing looks realistic. Nothing sounds realistic. Everything's fucked with. Everything's weird angles. The lenses are weird. And I think that making it in the 80s takes it one step further, is that you're even slightly alienated from the contemporary moment.
Yeah. And it does the thing where it solves the cell phone problem.
Yep.
It's so funny like how cell phones, I bet cell phones are the number one reason why people set shit pre-1990 now.
Totally.
I mean, that's why I would.
Exactly.
I really liked a lot of the artifacts in this movie that kind of ask you to imagine a world beyond it. Like the giant weird wasp, like where does that come from? Is it engineered? Like, is it something that slipped through some bleaker, darker dimension? The millipedes crawling around the acid scientist's feet, I think is just so cool because it makes me immediately think of William Burroughs and how like all of his dark interzone gods, millipedes were kind of a big part of their symbolism. And that was cool to me that this movie is using that sort of thing instead of other tropes. Like it's using these like darker tropes. Everything's very viscous and sticky and weird and gross. Instead of like clean, everything's like oozing around. It has almost like The Thing or something like that. It's this real gross, grimy horror, which I think is great.
Yeah. That reminds me of this anecdote I learned in film school that I'm probably going to get wrong because I went to film school so long ago. But of course, the earliest days of cinema were a camera sitting on a tripod, unmoving, single shots. And then even as it became more and more narrative, it was still one camera, tripod, long shot, like a stage play. Because that was the paradigm they were working from, is narrative is something that takes place on a stage. So you put the camera really far away and you get everything, right?
Right.
But then I don't remember who started doing close-ups. They figured out you could change the lens and get right into the actor and create intimacy and add that to the language of film. But some producer wigged out at that, saying, I paid for the whole actor. I should be able to see the whole actor, which is amazing. This movie reminded me of that because every frame of this film is so distorted and saturated that, I mean, half the time that Red or Mandy are on the screen, you often can't see them, or their eyes are blackened, or it's almost like their skin is swimming on their faces.
Yeah, there's that really cool overlay between Julian Sands and Mandy where it's going back and forth between their faces.
Yeah.
And
did you say Julian Sands?
Did I say Oh, yeah. Jeremiah Sands. Whatever happened to Julian Sands? Just disappeared.
What should call him?
He was like horror's Fabio, and then he just disappeared.
Room with a View changed my life, and nothing he did after that was very good.
Yeah, Warlock. No.
Warlock in particular.
Oh, what a terrible movie.
Poor guy. Anyway, yes, that crossfading between their faces was beautiful.
Yeah. The scene where they burn her to death is really well done. I mean, just in that bag, just flaking around, and then him trying to like hug her ashes, totally intense.
Yeah.
But you can't incinerate a body with just open fire like that. I know
You're
this.
going to pick on that one.
No, well, I mean, I only know this because I just recently read a story about, I reread a story about a dude who was trying to barbecue his girlfriend. He like killed her and then was basically using just a Weber grill to try to incinerate her, and it didn't work. He was just basically, he was having
You could dehydrate a body that way and make it slightly
edible.
Smaller. Oh, Jesus Christ. I'll hide it in my tummy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be, we were talking about this over the weekend now that I've kind of started listening to My Favorite Murders. Like, okay, like getting rid of bodies is really tough these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some ways I can tell you later.
Yeah, I have some good ideas myself.
So I have a little gripe that's sort of like a prepping for next week, True Crime or True Detective Season 1, which is something that really exhausts me about Hollywood is the age discrepancy in all heterosexual couples. If there's a straight couple in a Hollywood movie, the woman is always at least 10 years younger than the male lead. Always. Sometimes it's 25. In this movie, the age difference between them is about 17. I mean, okay, I work in a bar. I check IDs. I see straight people coming. There is very, very, very frequently an age discrepancy with couples coming in where the man is older than the woman. That's just, that's the world, right? But the disparity in Hollywood movies is fucking bizarre, where you have like old men who can't even fight an action sequence, who's married to or dating a woman that's like the age of their potential granddaughters. It's so relentless, and I'm going to amp this up for next episode, but there it is again. It's so predictable. You can just see it a mile away.
Yeah, I mean, the opposite has only ever worked once.
Tell me.
Harold and Maude.
So good.
Yeah, no one's asking for the gender-swapped version of Harold and Maude, are they? Like where a young girl falls in love with an old, crusty man. He shows her how to live.
Isn't that Mandy?
Is it? Does he show her how to live? I don't know. Their romance is really like the heart of the first half of this film, though.
It's adorable. Oh, yeah. Wait, I'm sorry. While talking about working the door at a bar, I don't know if you've had this experience, because we both worked in bars, and I work at a bar where certain nights are slow enough that I can read. Were you ever able to read while you're working at a bar?
Yeah, like day shifts mostly.
Okay, so here's the thing for our listeners that might not know, but I tend to read books at the door of the bar when it's slow. 3 out of 4 people who walk up and see me reading, I'll check their ID and they'll say, "What you reading?" And I'll show them And then we'll have this moment where they are sorry they asked, and I'm annoyed that they interrupted my reading. Granted, I'm on the clock. I'm doing a job. Reading is not part of that job.
Yeah, if you have time to lean, you got time to clean, Mark.
Exactly. No, totally. But they say, what you reading? And I show them. And there's always a pause. And then they go, is it good? And it's like, you don't care. Cut your losses and go inside and get drunk. And again, 3 out of 4 people, same thing. And so I have to, like, if I see people coming, I have to hide my book so they don't interrupt me and ask me, what you're reading, is it good? Because they don't care. I don't care. And I know that's very cynical, but it's a fact. Like, a conversation never ensues. They didn't actually want to have a conversation. They were just being polite and curious.
Yeah.
But then it backfires because now they're in a conversation about a book that they have no interest in. I've never had it be someone like, oh, I love that book. Enjoy. Never. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't read really common stuff, but at least that would be sort of fluid. That would be a lubricated interaction. Yeah. And it totally made me laugh that in this movie,
there's that scene.
There's exactly that scene. What you're reading? Do you like it? Like, and Mandy is, of course, like just, and that's my experience of that moment. Yeah. Anyway, so I now read books on my phone with the Kindle app because nobody's going to ask me what you're reading while I'm staring at a phone.
Yeah.
Which means I have to give more money to Amazon.
I almost have the opposite experience where it's like, I almost want somebody to be like, what are you reading? That's amazing. Oh, I read that too. Like, I want that. Like, I have this fantasy where I'm reading like my book and on the train, someone's like, oh my God, come to our secret cult meeting of people, but it never happens. No one gives a shit about what you're reading at all.
No.
I'm often very curious about what people are reading on trains, though. I'm a little bit of a looky-loo with people's book covers. Like, if somebody looks interesting and then they have a book in their hand.
Oh, for sure.
I'm almost always like on Google immediately looking that book up.
Oh, I totally do that. And I will also add that if a friend comes up and we're talking and they say, what are you reading? Of course, I'm going to share it with them. They're my friend. We're talking. That's a very different thing. And we're exchanging something we're both interested in. But I totally agree with that. And I think that there's a little bit of, I've had this quote verbatim many times. A door guy reading a book only in San Francisco. You're cool, man. Like, don't you read?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Like, I
reading a book only in San Francisco.
I mean, one of the things I think I can say about myself safely is I read a lot more than the average person.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, and I'm such a fan of it that I just want more people to read, and I'm so disappointed. Like my coworkers, for example, or many of the people I've worked with, they read like airport grade literature.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of that stuff too, but I have sworn it off. I'm fucking done reading any sort of marketing book or any sort of self-help book or anything like that. I'm completely done. Unless it's like a crazy weird manifesto, I'll probably read that too. But it has to be probably satanic or pessimistic or involve weightlifting or something in order for me to care.
And that is not available at the airport.
It is not. So it's weird. Like, I'll talk to somebody and they'll be like, what are you reading? And you're like, oh, this book called Conspiracy Against the Human Race. And they're like, what's it about? Oh, it's about how our consciousness is something that we fucking stumbled into like retards and probably shouldn't have. And it's ruined all of us. And there's no escape from it except for maybe starving yourself to death and saying no to life, which kind of goes against the whole will to life thing. And you're like, what are you reading? Oh, this really great bio about the guy that started Nike. You're like, fuck, man. and a lot of times it's like really well-meaning people who are really smart and interesting.
Sure.
I just want to like take these books from them and be like, you don't have to read Richard Branson's book because the Count of Monte Cristo exists.
Right.
Like if you want to read about somebody making themselves, here's this thing. But then again, it's like kind of snobbery. It's like, Harold Bloom, who's my favorite literary snob. He's like the best literary snob ever. He was shitting all over genre stuff, and then Neil Gaiman kind of got in the mix. And this is a few years ago. I think maybe Harold Bloom said something like, the Harry Potter books are pieces of shit, and I know that you think it's helping people read, but it's actually not. It's like making them like really dumb shit, which I'm sort of on board with. But I'm also kind of on board with Neil Gaiman, who says, look, these are windows to imagination, and we should be encouraging merriment and myth whenever possible. But I don't know, because that's how you get fucking Marvel movies, you know. Like it's a
Yes,
really
it is.
it's a tough like line to walk, you know.
Yeah, it was also a gateway for adults to invest more time in really simplistic fantasy.
Yeah, and I think those books. I really tried with Harry Potter, man. Like, because I think J.K. Rowling rules. I love
Super
her.
fascinating.
Like, I love her so much. I had kind of a similar experience with like Davey Havok from AFI. He's the nicest person I've ever met. Like, I bartended at this goth nut club for a long time, and he used to come in, and he's exactly how you'd want like a real deal, cool musician to treat people. Like, he was so cool, so kind. I just didn't like AFI. You know, so it's like. I tried to like the stuff, and I don't mean to compare AFI to Harry Potter. I think AFI is probably much better than Harry Potter is, like on the art scale. But I mean is like, I have so much respect for the person who did the thing, but I don't end up not liking the thing. But I'm not on board with Harry Potter, man. I think it's fucking trash. I'll say, I know that's probably a third of our listeners are probably bummed right now, but it's just not great. And I'll do a thing like my favorite film critic of all time, Armand White. He's just a super troll. He writes for National Review now because I think no one else.
Oh, that guy.
I think no one else will have him now.
No, you're about to lose another third of our listenership.
But the reason why I like his reviews is he will just shit all over something that everybody loves. But often, even when I when I've loved the thing that he's shitting on, like There Will Be Blood is a perfect example. I thought that movie was great. Armand White articulated quite a few reasons why it's terrible, and they're not wrong. But what he used to do, now I think he's on this right-wing website, he doesn't do this so much anymore, but he would say, this movie is trash, and here are 5 other ones that are much better examples of what this movie's trying to do.
Birth of a Nation.
He's not like that. What movie did he actually defend that was so... Oh, the G.I. Joe movies, like the first and second G.I. Joe movies.
That's funny.
And what he's looking at, and I think he would probably like Mandy. Like he didn't review it. I went and checked. I was like, oh, I got to see his review of this movie. I think he would like this movie because he wants the camera to be doing something interesting. To him, the artistry of the film is more important than the message it's trying to deliver. So he would totally shit on a movie like 12 Years a Slave. He was like, look, this is just more of the same bullshit. It's not an interesting movie. You're not looking at anything you haven't seen before. And it just has a message and storyline designed to win an Oscar. Whereas Mandy probably hits more what he likes about like he loves the Fast and the Furious movies. And I think what he likes about those movies is that they're doing something that only film can do. Like you can only see that sort of wild shit in a film. And I think that's why Hereditary was so successful. And some of the other like more auteur horror movies, they're so visual. And one of the reasons why, even though I really liked it, I didn't think Get Out was that successful visually because it's not like breaking any new ground. It was great script, really fun, good acting, hilarious, but I don't think it strikes the same high note as Mandy. And I know probably there's the last third of our audience like liking Mandy better than Get Out.
Thanks, everybody.
You know? See you later.
Didn't even make it to 50 episodes. What else?
What do you think about the way that Mandy herself is portrayed? I mean, she's obviously very attractive, but they did a lot in this movie to make her sort of unattractive too. Yeah. Like she has a scar on her face or the birthmark or whatever, no makeup.
She's always like dead stare.
Yeah, yeah. But on the other hand, she's sort of like probably every Hesher's fantasy of a girlfriend. You know what I mean? She's like smoking weed, doing fantasy art, listening to heavy metal, reading fantasy books. I mean, that's pretty. She's basically like ready to go on that like black metal girl's Instagram page, you know?
Yeah, she's sort of a doom metal manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah.
She doesn't fill that role in this film. I'm not saying that this movie has that problematic, but there is a bit of like, oh, Mandy, she's that thing. She's, you know, that you can just sort of like cast all these ideas about femininity onto. Yeah. That's this unobtainable, mysterious mystique of femininity. It's got a bit of that, but but I think she is actually interesting, and I think their relationship is really endearing. Yeah.
Yeah, and their relationship really reminds me a lot of like the couples I know up in Humboldt County. like where the wife will be this very ethereal, going to yoga, maybe has a kombucha company sort of thing. Definitely looks at her astrology, definitely if Mercury's in retrograde, it's a bad day. And then the husbands, a lot of them are weed dudes. They're out doing sort of roughneck shit. And I see, so they're especially being out in the woods and stuff like that with their weird like little cabin that's made out of windows. I think it's a relationship dynamic that like seemed very real to me. Like,
yeah, well, I think that disparity is at such an extreme in this movie. Absolutely, is that she exists in this fantasy world, and what's more real than chopping down trees for a living? Getting dropped by helicopter and chopping down trees for a living. I mean, again, that you could sort of cast a certain feminist message into the way that this plays out, that her death causes all this fantasy because Red is coming from such this very concrete, real world of sweat and viscera, that everything that ensues after her death is not, sort of, at least in the way the first half sets up, that's not his world.
Yeah.
Like he names Galactus and I forget if he actually knows that that's not a planet or and it was joking. Or
she definitely
he just
said something about it.
She says something about it, but I can't remember if he was just joking, like he knows it's not a planet and that was the joke, or if he's just mistaken because that's just not his world. And then the second half of the movie, it's entirely fantasy. It's entirely this fantastical realm that, yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be tough to get the usual feminist talons tearing this to pieces a little bit because the nature of their relationship, like he's not putting any sort of, there's no command over her, Like
no, he comes home and asks her what she's up to, and that's pretty much what they hang out doing. It
seems like just a very like Oakland metalhead relationship. Like all my friends, like the girls, like usually super hot and the dude's kind of rough looking, and he works, the dude is like a pipe fitter or something like that, and the girl's waitress but also has a degree in whatever. Like it reminds me of a bunch of my friends over there.
The only difference is Nick Cage character would be actually 17 years younger and ride a skateboard.
Or rode a skateboard. And he probably
they all still ride a fucking skateboard.
I know, yeah.
Like well into their late 40s.
Yeah, it's so weird, man. I can't do it, mainly because I was never that good at skateboarding. But
I can't do it because I have dignity and self-respect.
I don't know, man. Another level is like, if it's fun, why stop doing it? I mean, look at us. We're like over 40 jiu-jitsu guys.
For the same reason I don't wear sandals with socks. I mean, not everything that feels good that you do as a child makes sense as an adult.
I don't know. My buddy, TV's detective Rob Barrere, posted a video of himself riding around on like an 80s Powell Peralta skateboard the other day. I was like, fuck, that looks fun. The other thing that I think makes Mandy work well as an object of affection is she looks
Did you just refer to a woman as an object?
Yeah. I mean, that's what the film's doing. Like, there's for sure the fucking male gaze, and that's where I'm going with this, is that the type of dude that watches this film, that's his kind of girl. Like, how many movies have like some blonde girl or whatever, and you're like, okay, well, she's hot, but I wouldn't go revenge her. She's not my cup of tea. I wonder how like calculated that is. It's like, okay, this is a movie for Heshers, so we're gonna have a Hesher lead actress that is to fall in love with, and then the enemy is the Jesus freak. This is like the reverse Paradise Lost, the West Memphis 3. Like it's like the reverse of that, It's like where this whole like underground occult heavy metal thing is the mainstream. That's like almost another way of looking at this movie. It's like that's the mainstream viewer for this film, which is very different than it would have been in the 70s.
Yeah, it's great.
Another scene I thought was great is when the chemist is doing like getting all the blotter acid onto the sheets, and he's
with
using his bare
gloves.
hands, and my body was just like, oh my god,
don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Yeah, or maybe he does.
Yeah, I feel like all I've got left is to complain about the age discrepancy between men and women in Hollywood films. Actually, my last comment about that is actually that something you I think mostly raise as an issue off mic is your fatigue over false Hollywood liberalism, the way it sort of plays itself out on screen and off screen, and how it's a bunch of shit. And I feel that this is an example of that. Like, Hollywood is so woke, and that's why there's always 2 decades age difference between the leading man and the leading woman in a movie. Not to mention that Hollywood never makes movies
how is that woke though?
It's not.
Oh, okay.
It's so paper thin close to Me Too, but will never get redressed. This will just be the way it is forever.
Yeah, I guess where it really like sticks out for me is like you'll have actors complaining about gun violence, and it's like you make movies that are about guns.
Yeah.
To me, it's like if Hollywood really gave a shit about gun violence, they would stop making movies, and not
It would
because
make movies about pillow fights.
Not because I'm not one of these people that thinks violent cinema causes violent behavior. I just don't. But I feel like it's like if you were against wife beating and your entire industry made a shitload of money off of wife beating movies, you would maybe say, hey, wait, look, this message is a little mixed. You know, and I'm okay with making violent, crazy movies. I love them. I just don't want that actor going on fucking late night shows later and bemoaning what somebody does in the, you know, like what some law abiding person does with their AR-15. You know, like, and that's definitely we're losing all of our audience now.
Now we're getting people hate listening.
Now they're coming after us. But my thing is like, okay, if you're Sean Penn and you want people to not have guns, why not make movies or, you know, where that's not the focus, you know, like, because it is so American to have a solution in a movie be a chainsaw or a gun or something like that. So why not try something different or stop bitching about it? It feels hypocritical to me, and that's the thing that always gets me.
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe one of my final comments on this movie is it's so gloriously absent any modern concerns, like on the surface. You know what I mean? It's not trying to be any sort of particular movie. It's not trying to say anything.
Oh, yeah.
It is just existing as an object of art, which I think is pretty refreshing.
Totally. Completely agree.
Oh, you know what we completely didn't talk about is the soundtrack.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
So that was Johan Johansson's,
Yeah.
arguably the last film he did before he died. It's so fucking good, and I think I like it the most of all of his soundtracks. And it, you know, speaking of metalhead appreciation, it does include guitar playing from Stephen O'Malley of Sun. Mm-hmm. It's a great effect, I think. Yeah,
and it has that King Crimson song opening up,
which is incredible.
Yeah, I thought it was peculiar that that's called out in the opening credits, which, you know, when they do sort of things like that, it gives it weight. And they also call out the name of the dude who has the crossbow, Carruthers, I think is his last name. Mm-hmm. And he's like a classic genre, you know, horror act, or not necessarily horror, but he's in Predator, for example.
Yeah.
They call him out. And then there's that weird opening little script at the very beginning.
But not quite a crawl text, but the text.
Yeah, the text
like
at the very
lay
beginning.
my feet.
Yeah, like
when I die.
Yeah, two speakers at my feet, and you know, it sounds so heavy metal. But did you look up where that's from?
I forgot. I hope you did.
Yeah, so it's from in 2005. This dude who was on death row, it was like his final words, and it was like a kind of a heavy metal dude or whatever. But he was like a bad guy, and they executed him, and those were his final words. So you're like, I thought they were lyrics, but they're not. But they're part of a murder. And it's kind of an interesting choice because it doesn't really connect to anything else, but it also sort of thematically does, like, you know, serial killers, death row stories.
Yeah, again, that's another layer of because it's cool, I think.
Yeah.
Are you a King Crimson fan?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't really spend any time listening. Okay. They weren't like one of the bands that I bought albums of when I was a little kid, and you know, I've heard them as an adult. And
I was a huge fan. I guess I still am. So what have we learned?
I hope that people keep making movies that look cool.
Yeah.
And weird movies. And I hope Nicolas Cage keeps making movies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things I responded to the most, despite the fact that this was kind of my favorite kind of music as a movie. You know, like slow, droning, low, minimalist, abstract, and terrifying is kind of, that's what I dig, and this is what this movie was. But the thing I genuinely responded to is after the first time I saw it, I really had to wonder what the fuck I just saw. And I don't get that experience as often as I wish I did. It's deeply confusing.
I wish I had seen this in the theater. If there was a movie to have seen in the theater, it was this one for sure.
Yeah.
Bummer, I missed out on that. And I think this is, to my mind, maybe my favorite film I've seen so far this year. And I didn't have that feeling right away, which is kind of interesting. Like when I watched it, I was like, okay, hold on. Before I like come out on this movie is like big thumbs up. Did I just watch some nostalgic trash? Like, did I just watch the thing that I'm always complaining about? And then I had to think about it. I was like, well, yes, but not exactly. And yeah, I think this was the most successful for a lot of reasons film that I saw all year.
What was your thought about the Cheddar Goblin?
Hilarious. What it made me think about is, I don't know if you've had anything really traumatic happen to you, but when something really traumatic happens, like for example, a car crash, right? When I was like 15, I wrecked this car and just completely fucking destroyed it and like almost went through the window, but then the airbag smashed me in the face. It was like a really, at the time, horribly traumatic, but you know, just a fender bender really. But I just really distinctly remember like the commercial that was on the radio, you know, and it was so, it's for like this local, like furniture store in Louisiana. And I just remember it. And to me, the Cheddar Goblin thing was sort of like that. Like he came in and the absurdity of just seeing a commercial or hearing something that's part of the normal world, it just seems so far away and perverse that I liked that they made that scene, that commercial, far away and perverse.
Yeah.
Who directed it? I know somebody else.
The guy who did Too Many Cooks.
Right.
Which is one of the greatest short films ever made. I will argue that.
No, it's really good. I would suggest, if you haven't seen that, to go to YouTube right now and just look up Too Many Cooks and then go listen to the Wisecrack episode about it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really well done, really articulates why it's so weird and disturbing and fun. And I would say that Too Many Cooks thing is more successful than most of the horror films that came out in the last 5 years.
100%.
Yeah.
It's really upsetting and hilarious.
Yeah.
Very both.
Okay. Somebody comes in and murders your wife. What weapon do you make to go avenge her?
Ooh, okay. One thing we didn't talk about is that his blade is sort of the Celtic Frost band logo.
Yeah.
Made into like a scythe, or it's sort of like was it Klingons that had that sort of, it's like a staff, but it's got blades on both ends?
Yeah, Klingons had that.
Yeah. You know, I have a limitation here because I was not a boy who grew up with like throwing stars and thought much about weapons. So I don't sort of have any frame of reference for fantasy weapons. Let me think about that.
It's almost like another way of looking at it is like, what would your fantasy weapon be? Like, for instance, in Krull, there's the glaive. Highlander has the thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you see the glaive? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think it's called the glaive. Yeah.
I read the book of the book adaptation of Krull when I was a kid.
Weird.
Yeah. God, I don't know. You know, right now I've been so into efficiency and pragmatism that it seems like guns are a pretty pragmatic weapon.
Yeah.
But if we're going to frame it in terms of this fantasy world where form follows function in a spiritual or symbolic way, the gun isn't very good. Guns don't work symbolically so well anymore. They're just too ubiquitous. Who am I fighting? What am I after? What's the poetic justice?
I guess let's just say it's a random like demonic biker gang. Same sort of deal.
Maybe some sort of giant branch thresher that could drive faster than motorcycles and just chew them up.
So you drive a high-speed chipper shredder.
Yes.
Right, that is your weapon of choice.
Yeah, against motorcycles. I think that'd be great. Or if we're going to go totally fantasy, from Dungeons and Dragons, the portable hole. If I had just a big one of those.
Oh, the bag that you can just put stuff in, or the
that's the bottomless bag, or the giant
bag of holding.
The bag of holding. That's it. Yeah. No, it's a kind of like a big piece of fabric, and you unfold it, and it's a hole.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember where it goes. Maybe it's infinite.
It goes to like
blackness.
a room, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Right. Panos Cosmatos, he talked about how when he was first putting the movie together, all the old D&D manuals were kind of like his inspiration for color schemes, which I thought was pretty interesting.
That's great.
I was like, yeah, this guy's deep. And, you know, I always love whenever somebody who's made it references their time playing D&D. It's one of the things I love about Ta-Nehisi Coates. It kind of took my guard down around his writing a little bit. Like when I found that out about him, that he was a heavy D&D player, I was like, okay, well, I really want to listen to what this guy has to say, because I feel like we have this connection. Not that we don't have a connection, but I feel like there's a connection there where it's like, I can totally understand what it's like to be somebody immersed in role-playing games. So I want to hear that thought. And I ended up liking his books quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a weapon in mind?
I mean, for me, I'm going like cowboy action revolvers. Like I think just like a Colt single action 45, like some old ass cowboy gun, but with maybe some sort of weird filigree on the handle. You know, like I love in 310 to Yuma, the Hand of God has the cross on the handle.
So, okay, when I picture that style of gun and using it sort of like you're picturing it not as a utility but as a fantasy weapon, I always picture it with two-fisted.
Yeah, you have to have two of them, of course.
Which was it Mythbusters who kind of broke that like actually if you shoot two guns at the same time, you're just a terrible gunfighter.
Yeah, you're way less accurate. I mean, what people did was the second one was just their backup gun. Instead of, because you couldn't drop magazines, usually you would just like shoot one, holster it, grab the other one, and shoot that one.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of people did it.
I mean, it looks rad, like two guns, but it's also akin to the sort of sideways, what is it called when you, that
the
Israeli
gangster shooting from the side.
Yeah, which is, again, it looks cooler, but is far, far less accurate. I feel like the 2.6 shooters looks rad, but you're going to waste 12 bullets before you get anything accomplished.
I think the other thing cool is like their black powder, just like belching smoke out of the sides and the front of them.
Yeah.
There's like the character in Preacher, the Saint of Killers, is this like big, heavy, you know, giant Western killer, and he has these 2.6 shooters that can kill anything that they shoot, and it usually blows people in half. I wish that show was better, man. That's such a disappointing show.
Yeah, I couldn't follow it through. So when you picture these guns, you just sort of describe them, but are they like gleaming chrome, or are they used and weathered and chipping?
Oh, totally used and weathered, chipping. Like there's probably blood on the butt of the pistol just from beating someone to death with it. And that's the other that's the other thing too, is you want to be able to like pistol whip somebody to death with your revolver. If you're in a revenge movie, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like, you know, maybe you're fighting some werewolves. You can make some silver bullets, you know, do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Or really hard. What movie was it with the hard tip? Oh, Only Lovers Left Alive.
Oh, with the
with a wooden bullet. Yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't even have to be that hard, to be honest. You could put some plywood in a bullet like that and it would go right the fuck through you.
That's true, especially if you avoided a rib.
Yeah, even a 22 would go right through your chest. I mean, it's just like, it's so powerful. Like a gun is so powerful that it's going to cause you some trouble. I mean, that's how Brandon Lee died. Like it was just the wad from the gun went through him.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and there was that soap opera actor who pointed a gun with blanks at his head and pulled the trigger as like a sort of joke, and just the spray killed him.
Yeah, it's no joke, man. Like that shit is gonna cause you some problems.
Yeah.
Cowboy guns, man, the coolest.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's all I got.
Fade to black. Roll the credits.
All right.
Subscribe to our mailing list at scarythoughts.org and email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org, and go get started. If you haven't already, watch True Detective Season 1. Actually, rewatch it. We always watch everything multiple times, but I'm so glad I rewatched True Detective Season 1. It really gave on a second watching.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that series so many times, probably more than any other series I've ever watched, and so I'm ready.
What's the show that you've watched more than any other show?
Oh, it's that. There's definitely not anything I've watched more than that.
I've watched Community like 5 or 6 times, and Buffy almost as many.
It might even be. I think it's the only serialized show that I've watched more than once all the way through. Yeah.
That's because you read books and I watch TV.
Well, there's that.
Thanks for listening, everybody.